And we are live.
The world of energy is changing. The energy system of the future will be based on sustainable, renewable energy. Innovation and digitalization are changing the way we consume energy. How can decision makers in governments and businesses prepare for the energy transition? Long-term energy scenarios, LTES, can help plan for a low-carbon future by identifying opportunities, potential risks, and cost-effective near-term solutions. IRENA actively supports energy planners through its global LTES network. Governments can share their experience, exchange best practices, and explore the most pressing future trends together with global experts. Government institutions and supporting technical agencies can become members of the LTES network. Join us. Contact LTES at irena.org for more information.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and welcome again to the webinar series on long-term energy scenarios for developing national energy transitions plans in Asia. And today is the final session, so welcome to this final session of this webinar series. And my name is Juan Jose Garcia, and I'm Program Officer of Clean Energy Transition Scenarios at IRENA. And again, I have the pleasure to be your host today. This webinar series has been organized as one of the core activities of the IRENA's LTES network. This is a community of energy scenario practitioners from governments and also from other sectors that aims to facilitate these spaces for dialogue and for sharing experiences and good practices on planning for the clean energy transition and the role that the energy scenarios has in this planning process. Today, as we are finalizing this webinar series, we have two presentations. Today, we have with us one of the technical partners of the LTES network. We have today a presentation from State Grid Corporation China through a State Grid Energy Research Institute. And today, they will be presenting their experience on developing and using energy scenario with a concrete case example. Specifically, they will be presenting how the role of energy scenarios between the research on carbon emission reduction pathways in China's power industry. And also, we have the opportunity today to hear from the ASEAN Center of Energy, who will be presenting their work on modeling the energy transition in Asian countries. Next slide, please. So for today, we have prepared the following agenda. As usual for this webinar series, we will start with a very brief introduction of the LTES network to frame the work that we are currently doing. And after this presentation, we will start with the presentation of today's speakers. After the presentation of the two speakers, we will have a space for dialogue, around 20 minutes. We will be discussing some concrete questions from their presentations, and also we will address some of the questions from the audience. So, and after that, we will have some closing remarks from our implementation partner, ESCAP, and that will be the end of this session. Next slide, please. So in this regard, we encourage you to use the Q&A function in the Zoom platform, so you can put there or post your questions to the speakers, and we'll do our best to address them. And maybe another announcement is that you can find the recordings of the previous sessions of this webinar series, and of course the material that was presented over there in the IRENA's website, so you can access to them using the URL that you are seeing on your screen. And well, with this are the announcements. So now I would like to introduce our first presentation of today. Is with the LTES network presentation. So for this, I'd like to introduce Nadim Gussus. He is Associate Program Officer of IRENA's Innovation in Technology Center, and he will be delivering this presentation. So Nadim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juan Jose. I hope you can hear me well. And yes, so I'll present very, very briefly about the LTES network in case you missed our previous presentations. We have a slightly longer one in the first session, so you can check out more details there, but I will go through some brief points quickly. So the Long-Term Energy Scenarios Network is a global platform for energy planners in governments to exchange national long-term energy scenario practices amongst themselves, but also amongst scenario practitioners in academia and research, private sector, or any other field that uses long-term energy scenarios for their planning. And the aim is to promote a wider and more effective use of long-term energy scenarios, specifically in the context of the clean energy transition. The energy transition brings about a lot more complexity to the changes to the transformation of the power system, to the energy system as a whole. And the aim of this network is to really discuss the practices that can make this, let's say, a more effective planning process for countries. Over the past 5 years since the network has started, first in the context of the Clean Energy Ministerial, but moving forward as well through IRENA's own organization, there have been over 60 countries that have shared their own experience and practices, and these have all been shared as well by the LTES network in different reports. And we've held over 60 international and regional events, both in person, but also as webinars, as the one you're attending today. And we have 29 members, 29 member countries, essentially, which are countries that are interested and already have an advanced level of scenario development and aiming to really try to solve these common problems together. And we have 13 technical partner institutions, and those are institutions, sorry, that support countries in developing and using their long-term energy scenarios. The topics of the network revolve around three, let's say, main scopes. So from a thematic sense, we have three different scopes. The first being strengthening scenario development. This is looking more at the institutional side of strengthening, let's say, the scenario ecosystem. So here we're talking about, how can institutions coordinate and collaborate together to produce more effective long-term energy scenarios? How do you strengthen the consultation and stakeholder engagement processes for scenarios for a more inclusive, let's say, scenario development process? How do you broaden the scope of scenarios to meet the needs of the transition? The second scope is about improving scenario use. So here we talk about what the purpose of creating the scenario is. Is it more exploratory? Is it for investment purposes? Or is it to raise ambitions, for example? And the second aspect would be, how do you use these scenarios as well to affect policymaking, to lead to more effective policymaking, essentially? How do you communicate those scenarios? So that's the second pillar. And then we have the final pillar, which is about creating the skill and capacity, let's say, ecosystem within the government to not only develop the scenarios. So here we're not only talking about how do you develop a strong, for example, energy modeling capacity within a government, but also how to guarantee that you have the right framework to also understand and use these scenarios and to assure their quality as well on the long run. So as I mentioned, we've done these different dialogue events and these conversations between the practitioners, and these have translated into reports as well on thematic and regional, let's say, areas that you can see here. So moving past this thematic scope, there's also a regional scope to this network. So over the past years, we've held two main webinar series focusing on Latin America and the Caribbean, which included 14 countries. This was done in 2021, and with partners as Get Transform and Yuan. And then we had another regional webinar series with Africa, which included 9 countries and 3 regional institutions, such as power pools, for example. And we partnered here with UNECA, Get Transform, the African Development Bank, the African Union, and the African Union Development Agency. So as you can see here, we're holding these peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. So the countries are interested as well in discussing these topics with neighboring countries. And it really promoted this kind of very effective knowledge sharing about the experiences and practices. And those are also then compiled into different reports, regionally focused reports that are disseminated widely within the region, but also outside to really promote this peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. So as you can see, there's a report for Latin America, another for Africa. And then after this webinar series is concluded, which is today, there will be another one coming for Asia. And this will help synthesize all this information that we've learned over these past great webinar sessions into a publication that can be shared globally. With this, I end my presentation. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Nadim. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today from the Asian Center of Energy. So today we have the pleasure to have with us Dr. Zulfikar Yurnaidi. He is Senior Officer of Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy, and Energy Efficiency at the Asian Center of Energy. He is also Senior Research Analyst of Asian Climate Change and the Energy Project. In those roles, Zulfikar conducts research and cooperation activities in the field of renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate change. These include development of thematic publication and popular articles, as well as development and management of collaborative activities in the region. So please, Zulfikar, the floor is yours, and feel free to share your screen with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Yuan, for the kind introductions. So first of all, thank you for having the ASEAN Center for Energy to join this webinar series of the LTES in Asia. So I think for today's opportunity, I would like to, on behalf of ACE, I would like to share with you about our model, especially the ASEAN Energy Outlook, or we call it the AEO, especially on how we utilize this model to update the status first of the energy sector in ASEAN, and also moving forward, what would be the trajectory of energy sector that it might take, of course, in the spirit or the pathways of the energy transitions towards carbon neutrality in the future. So it's a simple presentations, but maybe before I start, just a quick introduction about our institutions. So we call it ourselves ACE. So we are the intergovernmental organization. So we are under the ASEAN structure, but we represent the interests of the 10 ASEAN member states in the energy sector. So our main shareholders basically is actually the ministries of energy from the 10 ASEAN member states. We serve them as a think tank in which we conduct studies and provide policy recommendations, among those by utilizing the modeling that we have, the ASEAN Energy Outlook. We also serve as a catalyst to support the collaboration within ASEAN, so between member states, but also with the dialogue partners, country partners, or the international organizations such as IEA and of course IRENA. We also serve as a knowledge hub in which we collect and deposit the data and also knowledge that we gather that's through the ASEAN Energy Database System, which we develop here in ACE. But first and foremost, our main role is basically as the implementing agency of the APIC, ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperations, which is the regional blueprint for energy cooperation in the regions. Currently, we are in the phase of 2021-2025. And okay, so the APAIC is providing the guidance for energy cooperation activity in ASEAN, and it takes the theme of the energy connectivity, market integration in ASEAN to achieve what we call the 4 pillars of energy cooperations: the energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. It also takes a sub-theme of energy transition and also energy resiliency through greater innovation and cooperations. This is, of course, noting the trend of the past 3-5 years in the pursuance of energy transition towards a more diversification and clean energy system, but also in terms of energy resiliency, noting the shock in the energy sector due to the pandemic, post-pandemic energy recovery, and also the geopolitical tensions happening for the past few years. We cover 7 program areas, so we are not only talking about renewable energy and energy efficiency, but the whole spectrum of the energy. If you see here on the right side, we talk about the ASEAN power grid, for example, about the interconnectivity of power system for the whole ASEAN, which we are experiencing quite a huge boost from the success of the LTES or the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore interconnections or multilateral trading. We also talk about the gas pipeline, which is basically the security and resiliency of oil and gas market in the region. We also talk about the clean coal technology, noting the huge share of coal and also other fossil fuels in the energy system of ASEAN. We talk about renewable energy and energy efficiency. Specifically also on regional energy policy and planning, we developed this ASEAN Energy Outlook and also energy database system to support the capability of policy making in the region. We also talk a bit about civilian nuclear energy, but mostly on the discussions of capacity building for the member states. Specifically on renewable energy and energy efficiency, we do have the quantitative targets of our aspirational targets. You can see here on the slide as well. For renewable energy, our target is to reach 23% of renewable energy share in primary energy supply and 35% in installed power capacity by 2025. In terms of energy efficiency, the target is to reduce energy intensity by 32% compared to the 2005 level. So for us in ASEAN to be able to know where we are, the structure of energy system, and also to see the potential pathway of achieving these regional targets, and also the potential of achieving longer term targets beyond the current APAIC, for example, we developed this ASEAN Energy Outlook, or the AEO, which complements the APAIC and also support the creation of the pathways in achieving regional targets. We start to have this ASEAN Energy Outlook as our key modeling activity in ASEAN since 2006. Originally, the most of the modeling work is being handled by the IEJ of Japan, and the role of ACE is more on the connecting to the member states. But then throughout the years, we start to have more and more role to build our in-house capacity from the data gathering and then data processing and then analysis and then the modeling itself, including the writing of the report. And for right now, we have the internal capability to actually do the whole modeling works with, of course, still engaging some experts in as advisor for the key parameters and also for the review of the outlook. So the latest one is the AEO 7. It was launched last year in the Cambodia as the chair of ASEAN. And I haven't put it here, but we are currently working towards the next ASEAN Energy Outlook, the AEO 8, which is to be launched next year in the Laos PDR. So it's a bi-annual report. Maybe difference with the other outlook out there, the principles of AEO is based on collaborations, harmonizations, and validations. So since the beginning, we connect with the 10 ASEAN member states as the focal points or the working group in which we consult with them about the overall scenario, about the data requirement, and also together to harmonize the various data form that we have from ASEAN member states into a conformized uniform sets of modeling. And then once we have the results, we always get back to them to validate the analysis that we have. So that's why we call this report is from ASEAN by ASEAN to ASEAN. To the 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook, as mentioned, this is the general contents of it. You can visit our website in aseanenergy.org to find and read more about the report. But basically, we are utilizing a software that is called the LEAP, which is developed by the SEI. And then we model the whole energy system for each country. And then we aggregate the results and then analyze it and also report it. Maybe I will, maybe a little bit on the methodology. We model each sector of the demand. So residential, transport, industry, and commercial. And for each, we have like different level of detail. For example, in residential, we model the demand based on the appliances in the residential. For example, the lighting, the cooling, the cooking, etc., etc. For transport, we are based on the transport modes, especially in the road transport. So the buses, taxis, trucks, 2, 3-wheelers, etc. But for some others, due to the data limitations like industrial and commercial, we disaggregate basically the data into subsectors and sub-commercials like the oil, steel, and also the petrochemicals, non-metallic minerals, food, beverages, and also others, and types of buildings such as hospitals, offices, and also others. And for the transformation sector, we of course model the electricity, but also other energy transformations in, for example, like gas producing and also oil products producing sectors. And these are the scenario that we develop. So this is based on, of course, our interest to see how the energy would turns out in the next 30 years. So our model is running until 2050. And we have 4 scenarios. Baseline is assuming no new implementations of targets or policies in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency. The ATS is the national target, basically. So what would happen if each country achieved their own targets in RE and EE? Regional target is to fill in the apparent gap between the national target and also the regional target, especially to achieve the renewable energy and energy efficiency targets we see before. And the 4th scenario, the least cost optimization, is something that we introduced in the AO7, in which we optimize the electricity sector in terms of the least cost mix of the energy that provide electricity in terms of electricity generations. I think if you see here, we haven't really played with the net zero or carbon neutrality aspects of the energy transition, but this is something that we are currently explore and hopefully to be implemented and also reported, analyzed, and launched in the next edition of AO8 coming next year in September. Just a quick brief about the national targets of renewable energy that we implement in the AO7. So of course, some of these targets actually have been updated, like Malaysia. In here, we just set the target is 31% in 2025, 40% 2035, but they actually already have targets longer than this. And also, of course, we have to update this with their new NETR that just launched recently. The same for the energy efficiency. These are the targets of national level in different form, to say the least. Some of them are targeting the simple reduction of electricity demand. The others is reductions of energy intensity. And for others is also maybe for some specific sector, they also have their own target, like in transport, and maybe some of these also include the diversification of energy to biofuel, etc., etc. So for the next few slides, I would like to highlight maybe a bit of why we do this outlook, what kind of key analysis that we do, and maybe a bit of key ideas and also insights. First and foremost, of course, we do the ASEAN Energy Outlook to see the pathways of the ASEAN energy system, something that very important for us to develop the policies, to see what sector that we need to work with, what kind of technologies and policies we have to develop and also implement and strategize. First, if you see here in terms of the primary supply, the regions are expected to grow because most of us are growing economy, and GDP-wise, we are growing 3 to 4 times from 2020 until 2040 in PPP. And based on that, our primary energy demand is also expected to grow up to 4 times in the baseline scenario. But we noted that with the efforts centered on the energy efficiency, we can cut down this demand up to only 2.7 times growth only, which is very important for us. Meanwhile, for the demand side, we noted that the industry and sector are the key energy consuming in the regions, with oil as the highest energy use in transport and also coal in the power and also industry. We also use the analysis to do the monitoring and also projections of our targets. Like I mentioned, we have a target in 2025. We need to see whether we're going to achieve it, what are the gap, the strategies to fill the gap, and also what are the potential of us to having a higher target for the next cycle of our energy blueprint, for example. The third types is we use it to analyze the technologies and also policies that we want to implement to see how effective it is and how it can support us in achieving our regional targets. For example, we assess what would be the fuel shift of the road transport, what would be the impact for emission, for example. And we also noted in here that we are still, our scenario, especially in the baseline, still quite heavy on oil products in transport, but then we propose the penetrations of EV and also biofuel to see a higher achievement of renewable energy in end-use sector. But of course, this is still not yet as ambitious as what you might want to see in a net zero scenario. We also assess the utilization of battery to improve the penetration of renewable energy, same with the ASEAN power grid, which I'm not showing here, but also a key component of our analysis in the ASEAN Energy Outlook. We also discussed about the secondary analysis to noting that the energy sector is not a standalone sector, so it is related with the agriculture and land use. Of course, noting that many of the countries in ASEAN, like Indonesia especially, but also Thailand and Malaysia, are promoting biofuel as a diversification of oil products. We need to calculate what will be the land use of it. Of course, we have to assess the emission. As noted here, we are still not yet reaching the net zero or close to net zero emissions by 2050, but this is some scenarios that we implement in the AO7. We also analyze about the jobs creations, for example, that we see around 5 million jobs in renewable energy will be available for the next 3 decades. So this kind of analysis are something that we are interested and we are looking at. Financing is something that we very important for ASEAN. And basically in here, I just want to show that the differing level of energy sector will show a different results. So I compare the scenarios of outlook with another report produced by IRENA, but also together with ACE, the second RE outlook published also last year, that the differing level of the electricity penetrations or electrification in end-use sector and also differing level of renewable energy in the electricity sector can give can result in difference of investment required in power sector only from 700 billion in an AO7 scenario of APS to up to like 3.7 trillion in the second RE outlook scenario, that's closer to 1.5 degree Celsius target, which has 90% of renewable energy share and also more than half of the end-use sector are coming from electricity. So higher demand and higher penetration of renewables might require a higher investment. So understanding this and planning on the achieving this are something that we are looking at based on our outlook. This is my last slide. Just want to note that in line with what we planned for the AO8 in exploring carbon neutrality scenario, we at ASEAN just launched this strategy for carbon neutrality. Of course, this is not only about energy, but I highlighted some key regional strategies and also initiatives that are related with energy. This include the accelerations of green value chain integrations, interoperable carbon markets, and also deploying green capital with activities ranging from energy efficiency, CCUS, biofuels, and also, of course, enhancement and enabling the regional power trading. So I think I will stop there. You can visit our website for more information, and we'll be more than happy to have a Q&A after this. Thank you. Back to you, Yuan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zulfikar, for your presentation. And now I would like to go straight to our second speaker of the day with Mr. Dr. Yuan from the Energy Strategy and Planning Research Department at the State Grid Energy Research Institute. He's professor-level senior engineer and currently serving as director of Power System Analysis Laboratory and Energy Strategy and Planning Research Department. He has long been engaged in the research on the fields of energy strategy, energy scenario modeling, renewable energy integration, and has completed more than 30 national and state grid level scientific research projects. And he will be presenting the perspective of use of energy scenarios. So, Dr. Yuan, the floor is yours, and feel free to share your screen.
Hey, thank you, John. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to make this presentation. I am Yuan from SGCC, and today I'm very glad to share some of our researches on China's power sector transformation. First of all, I'd like to give a brief introduction to State Grid and SGCC. The State Grid was established in 2002, and it provides energy service in over 26 provinces in China and serving over 1.1 billion people. And over the past 20 years, State Grid has completed over 30 UHV transmission projects and maintained the longest safety operation record for large-scale power grid. And it is integrated with the largest installed capacity of renewable energy generation in the world. And the State Grid has also actively participated in the decision-making process of China's energy system transition, mainly by providing support to National Energy Administration and other central ministries. And SGCC is the think tank of State Grid. And we have 11 research areas, including energy strategy and planning. And we provide energy consulting services both for State Grid and the Chinese government. Let's start discussing the main topic. And first, I'd like to talk about our research on the power sector transition scenarios. We know China has proposed its carbon peaking and carbon neutrality goals in 2020. And we all know that power sector, it plays a vital part in achieving the goal. In China, carbon emission from power sector accounts for about 40% of total carbon emissions. And the Chinese government has also put forward very ambitious goals for increasing renewable energy share. The official goal is about 1,200 gigawatts of renewable wind and solar generation in 2030. which we think it may be upraised to about around 20 gigawatt. And the carbon neutrality would require combined efforts from different sectors to achieve the goal. And the point is, what responsibility should power system bear? It directly determines the different investment cost and the required policy. And so in our research on the long-term power system transformation, we designed 3 scenarios. The first one is ultra-low emission scenario. This means while achieving overall carbon neutrality of the whole society, the power sector still has carbon emissions. In the model, we put 800 million tons emission cap in 2060 and 130 billion tons of cumulative emission cap from 2020 to 2060. This means a relatively weak transformation for the power sector, and such as the industry and transport and building sectors would bear more responsibility. And the second scenario is a zero emission scenario. It means in 2060, the power sector would achieve a zero emission. And the last one is a negative emission scenario. This means through the biomass carbon capture and storage, the power sector achieves negative emissions in 2060. And the 3 power sector development paths through now to 2060 are simulated using the SGCC power system planning model, GESP, and it is used in combination with the leap-based energy economic model, which enables the iterative optimization of the energy sector and the power sector. And this is some major model assumptions. We have 7 balancing areas in China are considered, and the figure shows the investment cost assumptions of generation technologies in the model. And as to electricity demand, it is forecasted to increase to about 12.3 trillion kilowatt hours in 2030 and 15.7 trillion kilowatt hours in 2060. And under the zero emission scenario, the total installed capacity would increase to around 4,000 gigawatt in 2030 and 7,200 gigawatt in 2060 in China. And the share of non-hydro renewable generation would grow very rapidly. It would increase from 12% in 2020 to 28% in 2030 and 60% in 2060. In the meantime, the share of coal-fired generation falls to around 5% in 2060. And under the ultra-low emission scenario, more fossil energy generation is kept in power sector, and the share of non-hydro renewable generation decreased to about 53% in 2060. And under the negative emission scenario, share of non-hydro renewable generation increased to 65%. And under the zero emission scenarios, there are generally 3 phases of power sector decarbonization in China. The first one is the carbon peaking phase. The power sector emission peaks around 2030 with 4.7 billion tons. That accounts for about 49% of energy sector emissions, and it is 9 percentage points higher than now. And the second phase is ultra-low emission phase. There might be a platform period after emission peak, and falls to less than 1 billion tons in 2050. And the third phase is the zero emission phase of power system. The emission would fall to 0 in 2060. So The transformation cost varies under different scenarios. For the zero emission scenario, the present value of the total system cost during the planning period is about 57.3 trillion yuan in RMB. And under the negative emission scenario, the higher renewable penetration and the more CCS brings more investment in flexible resource transmission and other decarbon technology. The cost would increase by about 17%. And under the ultra low emission scenario, the cost would decrease by about 12% than zero emission scenario. The second part is I'm going to share some point of view on key issues for China's power sector transition. The first is the development of renewable energy. For China, the carbon peak and the neutrality calls for faster development of wind and solar generation. And China has unique advantages in developing wind and power. First, it has a rich resource potential. The technical potential of wind and solar generation are more than 3,500 gigawatt and 1,500 gigawatt in China. And the cost for PV, wind, and battery storage are expecting more decrease in the next decades. And also, China has a complete industrial chain and abundant production capacity. Its PV module and wind turbine production capacity accounts for about 90% of the world. It can support 300 gigawatt, the annual growth of renewable energy. So in our base scenario, the wind and solar generation capacity are expected to reach more than 1,800 gigawatt in 2030 and 1,500 gigawatt in 2060. The utilization of renewable energy may become a challenging problem for China in the near future, as the renewable curtailment rate is lower than 5% in China in recent years. However, as we have simulated, the curtailment rate may increase to more than 10% in 2030 and over 20% in 2060. It would be crucial for the Chinese energy authorities to enhance the system flexibility. And on the other hand, they need to find a reasonable curtailment rate for different regions in different time periods. And this can significantly reduce the system cost. And also in the long run, with super high renewable penetration, we think hydrogen production would be a feasible way for the diversified utilization of renewable energy. And in our scenario, the renewable generation for producing hydrogen is expected to reach 2 trillion kilowatt hours in 2060. And it would be a promising way to enhance the system's long period flexibility. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the future of coal-fired generation in China, how to properly plan the development and redefine the role of coal-fired generation. The most crucial issue for China's decarbonization. As in the past decades, the energy sector of China mainly relies on coal and coal-fired generation. China now has about over 80% of power comes from coal-fired generation, and a too radical retirement plan may bring power supply security problems. So as we think, the coal-fired generation and the renewable energy are not simply a substitute for each other. Coal power in China is now transforming into flexible resources by the flexibility retrofit, and in the long term, with CCUS, we think the system can still hold a certain amount of coal-fired generation while achieving carbon neutrality. And so in our scenario, the installed capacity of coal-fired generation would gradually increase to about 1,300 gigawatt to 1,400 gigawatt by 2030, and it will decrease after that and fall to 400 to 800 gigawatt by 2060. And the scale of CCS would expand rapidly after 2030, which would help the coal-fired generation plant become a part of carbon cycle economy. And the diversified power generation portfolio and technology innovation are very important for ensuring energy security in China. For the future hydro generation development, the potential resource, the remaining potential resource, mainly located in the southwest China, the installed capacity is expected to reach 420 gigawatt in 2030 and 500 gigawatt in 2060. As to nuclear generation, the coastal nuclear power station sites is very limited in China. The installed capacity is about 110 gigawatt in 2030 and 200 gigawatt in 2060. It may reach more than 400 gigawatt if we can develop the inland nuclear station. As to energy storage, it's also very important for system flexibility. And we think the installed capacity of pumped storage, it is more technically more mature and more cheap in the near future. And it is expected to reach 160 gigawatt in 2030 and 400 gigawatt in 2060. And for battery storage, it's expected to reach 150 gigawatt in 2030 and 800 gigawatt in 2060. Using CCUS technology will profoundly influence the way of coal phase out and the coal power transformation. We think more than 500 gigawatt of fossil energy generation requires to deploy CCUS in 2060. And for hydrogen, it is also a very promising area. Currently, China accounts for about 1/3 of the global hydrogen consumption, and it is expected that the proportion of green hydrogen in end-use energy sector will reach about 2% in 2030 and more than 15% in 2060. And also the form and role of power grid should also conform to the requirement of high renewable penetration. We think the power grid will transform to a new form of integrated development of the large-scale cross-region power delivery and the self-balanced micro power grids. And on the other hand, the power grids would upgrade to digital and intelligent power grids is also a development trend in China. So the last I'd like to talk about is transition cost. This issue is also very controversial in different areas. And our research shows that in 2025 and 2030, the system and the integration cost of solar and wind generation would be about 2 to 3 times compared with the current system cost. This would require the reform of both the electricity market and carbon market mechanism to better address those challenges. However, in the long term, we think the power supply cost would decrease due to the low demand growth, technology progress, and decreased cost in many low carbon technologies. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Thank you for your kindly listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yuan, for your very comprehensive presentation. And now I'd like to invite also to Zulfikar to turn on his camera and start this conversation segment. And again, thank you to both of you for your presentations, very interesting perspectives. And I would like to start this conversation segment focusing on the development process of your energy scenarios. During this webinar series, the different sessions of this webinar series, we have seen a common point, and that is the relevance of including different actors in the process of producing and elaborating these energy scenarios in different ways, and also in different moments during the development of scenarios. For example, at the very beginning for, let's say, establishing the core assumptions, or maybe to analyze the outputs of the energy scenarios. And we have seen many different methods also to implement this consultation with the key stakeholders. So I would like to address my first question to Dr. Yuan in this sense, in terms of including different actors in your process for developing your energy scenarios. Is this Getty including any other stakeholders to develop these scenarios? In terms of, are you coordinating with, I don't know, maybe with the generators or the end users, or is this stakeholder consultation happening in your scenario development process, Dr. Yuan?
Thank you, John. Yes, as we developed our models, and our scenarios, we would cooperate with many parties, such as researchers from the government-related institutes and the universities, and also we would apply and carry out some research projects that is designated by the decision makers, and our model would be and our models and scenarios would be improved and would be improved through all those process. And in many cases, we would provide the reports or policy recommendations with all those parties together, and to communicate with decision makers, and also for some issues that is closely related to state grid, the government would ask us to directly help making some development plans, such as power grid planning, or renewable energy or energy storage planning, and so on. And we may have more solid data, and we would also communicate with other parties and work together to support the energy systems decision making.
Thank you. Thank you. No, actually, you mentioned a very important point regarding the engagement with the government. Since you mentioned that basically that this, I mean, the example you presented about the reducing the carbon in the power system pathways involves the engagement of different sectors. So I will assume that the engagement of the government is a key aspect for this. Maybe a follow-up question here, Dr. Yuan, is how this engagement is happening. For example, who's coordinating this engagement? Who's in charge of to coordinate this consultation for your energy scenarios?
In state grid, I think it's not fixed. In state grid, we have several departments. They are in charge to communicate with the government or authorities such as there is a planning department in State Grid. They mainly communicate with the NEA, and we mainly provide, and they and the Department of State Grid, they would communicate with NEA, and then we support their work. And also sometimes the NEA would directly come to us, and they would put up some topics they are interested, and we would maybe we would provide reports or policy recommendations directly to them. So it is not fixed, and sometimes also some other research institutes or universities would ask us to work together on the government projects, and I think there are various ways of communication with policymakers.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yuan. Now, I want to go with you, Zulfikar, kind of the similar question. I mean, from your regional perspective, I mean, this coordination, let's say, is a country level. So, and considering the different jurisdictions and the different contexts of each country, I believe that might be a little bit more challenging, maybe this type of coordination to, let's say, produce your energy scenario. So my question to you is, from the ACE perspective, what mechanism are you implementing to make this coordination systematically every year, because you produce your energy outlook every year, as you mentioned. So I'm curious about that. How do you handle this coordination among countries? And if you can